Well, Moon Knight Episode 5 is here, and it carries on Phase 4's theme of emotional damage. Now all that's left to see is where Marc's journey goes from here. Let's talk about it.
What happened to you?
Hey guys, it's Law with CinemaBlend, joined today by my managing editor, Sean O'Connell, because today we're talking about the penultimate episode of Moon Knight. Sean, what did you think?
One of the most devastating episodes of Marvel television that we've seen in a long time, probably dating back to WandaVision. This was just a gut wrench as we learned all about the truth behind Marc and Steven and everything that's going on inside their personalities and their mind. Of course, it makes a ton of sense that we're going to be discussing spoilers for the entire season of Moon Knight as well as Episode 5. So if you haven't seen those yet, go back and watch them right now before you continue on with this video.
Yeah, what are you doing here right now?
There's a lot to discuss, Law. We're going to break it down section by section, and of course leading up to the finale of Moon Knight. So we want to make sure that you guys keep it here with us by hitting subscribe, turning on your notifications, and every time we post a new analysis video of Moon Knight or anything else in the MCU, you guys will be the first ones to hear about it.
Okay, here we go.
So right off the bat, I want to bring up the fact that we saw a lot of both Marc's and Steven's history through all these little Easter eggs in the Asylum. And we really got an insight to how the origins of these men came to be. Sean, there's a lot in this episode, but I wonder what specifically popped out to you as interesting for this character.
Well, it's, this whole series now has been set up as like this origin story for Moon Knight. And what we're realizing, especially as we get through Episode 5, is that he's just too complicated of a character to break down into like one or two episodes. You have to lay all this groundwork for who Marc is and who Steven is. And as we saw all these elements play out as the two of them explored their shared pasts, it was really fascinating to see these little Easter eggs and clues that were dropped into the previous episodes. The fish, the goldfish that he was drawing obviously stood out to me as an element that Steven is carrying around with him as a reminder. Even just something like the phrase later's gators. It's something that's weird, in the moment as you're watching it play out in an episode, but then when you get the explanation, just a brief explanation, of where it comes from, it carries that kind of emotional weight.
Later's gators.
And then, Law, we've been talking about too, this fictional film that Steven and Marc sort of escape into, and you get the tagline for that sort of faux Indiana Jones movie.
When danger is near, Steven Grant has no fear.
There's the perfect explanation of why Marc would create a fearless alternate personality that he can sort of deviate to when he needs to escape. And just hearing all of that stuff was so devastating to me, because it reminds me that like all these little elements that we've been analyzing over the course of the first 4 and now 5 episodes of Moon Knight, they carry so much emotional weight and have so much more of an impact once they're put into this context. And so, I was swimming through all of these references and really just trying to catch up with the emotion behind them, because it packs a heck of a punch.
Even Marc saying to Steven, like, that's the whole point of you. You're not supposed to see this stuff.
The point of me, what, to be a stress ball?
That hurt me, because it's just like, man, you've grown to love both Steven and Marc in this series, and to see them at odds with themselves, to see kind of the trauma that set them off on this journey. It was a pretty heavy episode, but also one of the better MCU show episodes I've seen in the last couple of years, right? Like it was just had a lot of great emotional weight. I agree.
And I think that's just a gift of the show, the way that it's written and the way that it's put together, of having us still really believing that, and credit to Oscar Isaac, who we'll talk about later on in this analysis, but the way that he sells all of those personalities makes it such a fantastic way to just strap in and go for this ride.
We're insane, Steven. Talking hippo. You're outside of my body now.
We kind of mentioned this in our other analysis videos, and I think fans everywhere are hinting at it, but there is a third altar that we're looking out for. But we kind of got the bait and switch in this episode. Let's talk about the fact that we still have not seen Jake Lockley, despite all these hints. And it's bothering me now.
Yeah, well, over the course of this entire episode, we kept being told that like Mark and Steven are incomplete, right? That there's something that's missing from them. And like you know, I thought it was going to be Jake or, you know, some other personality that was going to shine through. And there were so many elements in this episode, especially towards the end when Mark is in the street after he has decided not to go into his mother's Shiva. I was like, okay, well, here it is. We're finally going to meet the third person. And the taxi cabs being all over the place in the street was yet another indicator that it's Jake Lockley.
What a waste.
So, here's the thing. I don't think now that we're going to meet Jake, or if we do, it's going to be very, very brief. Because if they waste, and I won't say waste, but like if they use big chunks of episode 6 to now explain who Jake Lockley is, I think it's going to steal away from all the other stuff that has to get accomplished, you know, before this show wraps up. And, you know, I was having conversations with some people offline about how, like, at the end of this episode, it feels like Mark is finally his most full or his most complete. The scales are balanced. He has lost Steven and he's lost Khonshu at this point, but now it's all him and he's standing in the reeds. So I'm afraid that if they try to introduce that third element in this episode, it's going to be confusing. So maybe at this point, and tell me what you think about this, maybe they're just laying the groundwork, you know, for the possibility of the existence of this third personality, because we saw this sarcophagus that wouldn't open, and Oscar Isaac, in your fantastic interview with him earlier that you guys can see on CinemaBlend's YouTube page, talked about the fact that there are
things about their existence, Stephen Mark, that they are not aware of yet.
So maybe this is something that can get picked up in, you know, season 2 or the next time that we see Moon Knight. But maybe this is just them sort of laying the seeds and saying, yes, there's more to explore to this character. He's way more complicated than you think, and we're going to touch on it later. What do you think? Do you think we're going to see Jake, or is this just all teases?
You know, the fact that we didn't see him in this episode makes me want them. I want them to wait now. If we see him in any capacity, let it be a cameo at the end of this season, and let that kind of be the start of the next season or the next story. Because there's a handful of things that I know we're not going to get answered. I don't think we're going to see the Bushman. I don't think we're going to see a full Jake Lockley like revelation, right? And unfortunately for a lot of people who wanted to see more Moon Knight, I think, you know, like we didn't get him in this episode pretty much except for the reveal. Right. I think they subverted a lot of expectations for this show, and I love this show for that reason, because it still feels very superhero but different, and I would be a-okay with leaving all of those other big reveals for the next season, because there's almost too much that I need answered for episode 6 for the season to feel complete.
Yeah, and to that end, like, you know, the way the WandaVision left her off with the trauma of thinking that she had children and then doesn't, you know, that's going to be a thread that gets picked up in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So it's the benefit of Marvel having this interwoven universe where other stories can get explored in projects that we didn't expect. You brought up a really interesting point, though, is that this series, now that we've been through 5 of the 6 episodes, doesn't have a lot of Moon Knight in it. But in this episode, I think we got the most important Moon Knight scenes ever, which is his origin. So let's dive into that next.
You are a worthy candidate to serve me during this time.
Sean, we talked about this before, of the fact that this was like the Stephen Grant show at the beginning, and we talked about how the show would feel really different if it's the Marc Spector show, and we got kind of a glimpse of like his past through, you know, his mercenary work, specifically the origin scene in the Tomb of Khonshu. Pretty much straight out of the comics. There was a lot of, you know, there's references there, but we didn't spend a lot of time. Was there anything that really stood out to you in that scene outside of the fact that we saw him get his powers for the first time?
Like you said, just how accurate it was to the comic panels. That's exactly how I pictured it. It's a broken Marc Spector at the altar of Khonshu. Now, you know, our producer was pointing out the fact that in some of the comic versions, Mark actually does die. And his heart completely stops, and then Khonshu sort of revives him. So it was interesting that Mark was willing to make the decision, conscious to make the decision, and say, yes, I think he explained it in the episode of saying, like, this was just a way for me to keep living, to agree to turn myself over to Khonshu. There were people who were, speculating online about who actually might have killed Layla's father, and most people who have read the comics knew that it was going to be Bushman. I'm glad he got mentioned. That's great that they're at least keeping, it's Marvel being faithful to their source material. You're right, I would have liked to have seen him. It would have been pretty cool to set him up, but now he's an antagonist for somewhere down the road, because Mark is the spirit of vengeance. He's going to want to go after the person who killed Layla's father. But just seeing it in a credible way, because Moon Knight is one of the characters where, like, you're an avatar of an Egyptian god. Like, how credible or realistic and grounded can you make it? And the way that this played out in a way that I was like, okay, I can actually kind of believe that this, mercenary with no options left has to accept a gift or curse from an Egyptian god to say, serve as my avatar, as my fist of vengeance. I thought it was great. I got chills kind of seeing the Moon Knight origin play out in live action.
Yeah, and like you said, it looks so good. The way that they did, like, the high contrast, even the transition of him transforming into the suit was like one of the best transitions in the show so far. And like with Bushman, there's a lot of history there, right? So I'm so glad that we didn't see him, because you'd probably want to cast like a high profile actor for a role like that, so that Mark could eventually rip his face off. But hopefully that's in season 2. We go darker. But I also want to mention the victims of Moon Knight that were in the Asylum, because I feel like that plays into his origins. We see that Mark was a mercenary. He was actually the Fist of Vengeance, right? And he refers to them as like cities that he did the kills in. I thought that was super interesting, because they're showing us like, hey, he's a murderer too, like that, like while he's a superhero, he's still killing people. And I thought that was super, super interesting to see.
Absolutely. I'm here in Las Vegas. That's why I have a weird backdrop, and I'm here at CinemaCon. And yesterday we were at the Warner Brothers panel where Black Adam showed off its trailer, and The Rock was leaning into that aspect of him as an anti-hero, where they were saying like, hey, superheroes don't kill people, and he was like, well, I do, sort of thing, because he is, and again, adopted by a god and turned into a superpower because of this. I like that. I like that gray area that they're not afraid to weave into, and to sort of explore where, like you said, Mark has this really dark past.
You tried taking a life. See how quickly you forget.
Now let's move on to the Asylum itself, because initially we had talked about it being created by Harrow, like an illusion by Harrow, but it ends up that Mark's just dead.
I'm not crazy. I'm dead.
I love that Towerette said that it's like an afterlife, not the afterlife. To kind of expand what could be the mythos of the MCU. And our first real MCU connection, they mentioned the ancestral plane, which made me geek out a little bit, which makes me wonder, is there a Black Panther connection in there? There is now, but kind of an interesting place to be, right, Sean?
Absolutely, and I'm giving you proper credit for bringing up the ancestral plane and the connections to Black Panther. You've been on that bandwagon since you started this series, and it is really fast. It's Marvel sort of expanding out its scope and all the different places it can go. But by the end of this episode, we get to a place where, because Mark has lost Stephen, he's in the reeds. He's in the afterlife, like the version of the afterlife that he imagines. And Law, that we can't leave him there, right? Like, that's not going to be Mark's destiny. So he's going to have to reject the afterlife, like the peace and tranquility of being in your final resting place, because he's going to recognize that there's still so much that has to be finished. That we saw the souls raining down from Harrow getting rid of people who he's deeming not innocent. There's a lot of life being lost, and Moon Knight's the only one who can really stop him. And I find that to be so tragic that he's going to have to give up this bit of the reeds. And, there was a reference to a little girl who was talking to him in episode 1 when he was explaining the balance and the, of the heart having to get weighed with a feather. I loved seeing that process. And then she says to him,
and did it suck for you, getting rejected from the field of reeds?
Well, that don't make sense, because I'm not dead, am I?
I'm not
total
dead. Yeah.
foreshadowing, like outstanding foreshadowing. And yeah, I think it's going to hurt. I think it's going to hurt a lot because, as you mentioned, Phase 4 of the MCU is all about emotional devastation. Whether you are Loki or Wanda or now Marc Spector, Kevin Feige's coming for you, and he wants you to feel pain.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and there's something very poetic about the fact that he's finally internally at peace, but now there's chaos all around him that he still needs to fix. He made it to the afterlife, and yet again he has to reject death in order to become the Moon Knight. It seems like destiny. You know what I mean? So we'll see how episode 6 wraps it up. But I gotta give Oscar Isaac major props for this whole series, but this episode specifically blew me away. There's a scene where he's crying and then instantly turns to Steven outside of his mom's Shiva. And that just took me out. I was both emotionally devastated, and then I laughed out loud when he was like, "What?" He's a master, and if anything, this show continues to prove why he's one of the best actors of our generation.
It's also scary of how the conceit of, you know, the transitioning between Mark and Steven wouldn't work unless you buy the actor doing it so effectively. Yeah. Right? Like, we know exactly who he's playing. And then we'll go back and rewatch this entire episode of the different interactions between Mark and Steven. Like, I literally feel like I'm watching two different actors, and it's the same guy performing opposite himself in fantastic ways. So, yes, people are giving him so much praise and saying he deserves all of the awards that are possible for what he's done, not just in this episode, but in the entire series. Marvel has to be over the moon that they got Oscar Isaac to play this character, because he's thank you very much. He's so complicated, and there's so much to him, and Oscar Isaac really brings all of it to the surface. He's done a phenomenal job.
So, are you two like twins?
No. Yes, sort of.
Hey, great. That's really cleared this whole situation up for me.
All right, Sean, let's just wrap this up with general discussion about what we want to see in episode 6. Now, in my interview with Oscar Isaac, he accidentally revealed the location of the finale.
I liked when we were all inside the tomb and inside the Pyramid of Giza, and it's towards the end. You'll see. It's like we were shooting the big finale. I guess I just revealed that it happens at the Pyramid of Giza.
So I know it's going to happen there. So I can have some confidence that we haven't seen the last of Marc Spector. But what are your hopes for wrapping up this series? Because again, these 6-episode series, they're kind of hard to tell like a super complicated story. But this is a super complicated story, and I'm really excited to see how it all wraps up.
Yeah, the one thing I don't want to lose is Arthur Harrow and Ethan Hawke. I hope that they're not vanquished in a way that they're gone forever. And it seems like with the Egyptian gods, they almost entomb you in this little statue type thing. So maybe he gets put away someplace with the possibility of him coming back later. Because we're going to have to essentially settle what's going to happen to Layla. We know Khonshu is going to have to be reunited with Marc Spector, and they're going to be back on their trail of being Moon Knight. And they're going to have to figure out what they're going to do about Harrow. It's Marvel, so it's going to be some type of big action slam bang. But the question becomes, and this is really interesting because when people talk about WandaVision, I've heard people say that the finale of WandaVision was disappointing, and yet I thought it was really satisfying. But I found the finale of Falcon and Winter Soldier to be really rushed, and there was almost too much to get to, and they sort of, short shifted some of the storylines. And I really hope Moon Knight doesn't blow through a lot of these really important subplots that it set up, and allow some of these things to play out.
And I swear to Khonshu, if there's a scene where they're fixing a boat for like 5 minutes, I'm out. I'm just kidding.
You're not going anywhere. You'll be right here talking Moon Knight.
You're right. Well, thank you, Sean, for joining me today. And everyone, we're going to be finishing this series up. Episode 6 is coming next week, so you definitely want to be subscribed. Turn on that bell notification so you don't miss out on any updates. We have a ton of new videos coming your way. But yes, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you on episode 6 of Moon Knight Analysis.